What happens when Hollywood's most beloved rogue meets late-night television's most ruthless host? You won't believe what unfolds when Johnny Depp sits down with Jimmy Kimmel for what was supposed to be a routine promotional appearance, only to witness one of the most explosive confrontations in late-night television history. The shocking exchange that erupted last night has sent shockwaves through Hollywood, leaving viewers stunned and industry insiders questioning everything they thought they knew about Jimmy Kimmel's true character. Before we get into this incredible story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below, because you're not going to believe what unfolds when these two titans clash in what can only be described as television carnage. The studio audience was buzzing with anticipation as Johnny Depp made his entrance onto the Jimmy Kimmel Live stage, his signature swagger intact despite the legal battles and media scrutiny that had dominated headlines for months. The crowd erupted in thunderous applause, a clear indication that public support for the actor remained strong. Depp flashed his enigmatic smile, raising his hand in acknowledgement as he strode across the stage, his distinctive style commanding attention, even in the harsh studio lights. Jimmy Kimmel rose from behind his desk with what appeared to be a welcoming grin. But those familiar with the host's tactics could detect something different in his demeanor, a predatory gleam that suggested tonight would be anything but ordinary. As the two men shook hands, the camera captured a moment of tension that most viewers would miss, but would later prove prophetic of the chaos to come. "Johnny Depp, everyone," Kimmel announced to the roaring crowd, his voice carrying that familiar tone of manufactured enthusiasm that had become his trademark. "How are you doing, man? It's great to have you here." Depp settled into the guest chair, adjusting his layers of jewelry with practiced ease. "Thanks for having me, Jimmy." "Good to be here," he replied, his voice carrying that distinctive rasp that had charmed audiences for decades. There was a wariness in his eyes, though, the look of someone who had learned to expect ambushes in what should have been safe spaces. The first few minutes proceeded normally enough, with Kimmel running through the standard talk show playbook, asking about upcoming projects, making light jokes about Depp's eccentric fashion choices, and playing up the crowd's obvious affection for the actor. But seasoned observers of Kimmel's interview style could sense the host was merely setting the stage, lulling both his guest and the audience into a false sense of security. "So, Johnny, you've had quite the year," Kimmel said, his tone shifting almost imperceptibly. The studio lights seemed to dim slightly, or perhaps it was just the atmosphere growing heavier. "A lot of ups and downs, a lot of public scrutiny. How do you handle all that pressure?" Depp's posture stiffened slightly, recognizing the loaded nature of the question. "Well, Jimmy, I think anyone who's been in this business long enough learns that you can't control what people say about you. You can only control how you respond to it. I've always tried to stay focused on the work, on the craft that I love." But Kimmel wasn't satisfied with the diplomatic response. His smile took on a sharper edge as he leaned forward, entering what those in the industry recognized as his attack mode. "Right. But when you're dealing with such serious allegations, such public controversy, don't you think there's a responsibility to address these things head-on, rather than hiding behind artistic pursuits?" The question hung in the air like a challenge, and the studio audience sensed the shift in energy. Depp's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, his fingers drumming once against the arm of his chair, a tell that those who knew him would recognize as a warning sign. The atmosphere had transformed from celebratory to confrontational in a matter of seconds, and both men seemed to realize they had crossed into dangerous territory. What happened next would change everything, as Kimmel prepared to launch into territory that would prove he had no intention of treating his guest with even basic professional courtesy. "Let's talk about your ex-wife," Kimmel said with calculated cruelty, his words cutting through the studio like a blade. The audience fell silent, sensing they were witnessing something far beyond the usual late-night banter. "I mean, we're all thinking it, right? The whole domestic violence thing. You lost that case in London pretty spectacularly." Depp's eyes flashed with barely contained fury, his knuckles whitening as he gripped the chair arms. "That's not what happened, Jimmy. And you know it." The appeals court overturned key findings, and anyone who actually followed the case rather than reading tabloid headlines would understand the complexity of— "Oh, come on," Kimmel interrupted with a dismissive laugh that carried no warmth whatsoever. "You're sitting here trying to rehabilitate your image, but let's be honest with the audience. You were found to have assaulted your wife on multiple occasions. The judge called you a wife-beater. Those are facts, Johnny." The studio atmosphere became electric with tension as Depp leaned forward, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper that somehow carried more menace than any shout. "You want to talk about facts, Jimmy? Let's talk about how you've made a career out of ambushing guests who come here in good faith. Let's talk about how you've turned what should be entertainment into a public execution." Kimmel's grin widened, clearly enjoying the discomfort he was creating. "I'm just asking the questions the audience wants answered. You came on a talk show. Talking is what we do here. If you can't handle basic questions about your very public legal battles, maybe you shouldn't have agreed to the interview." "Basic questions?" Depp's voice rose, his famous composure finally beginning to crack. "You're not asking questions, you're making accusations. You're repeating lies that have been debunked in court, and you're doing it because you know it gets you clicks and ratings. This isn't journalism, Jimmy, this is exploitation." The host's mask was slipping now, revealing something uglier underneath. "Look, I get it. You've had a rough few years. Career in shambles, reputation destroyed, friends abandoning you left and right. But that's not my fault, and it's not my job to help you pretend it didn't happen." Something dangerous flickered in Depp's eyes, a flash of the intensity that had made him one of Hollywood's most compelling actors. "You know what your problem is, Jimmy? You've gotten so comfortable in your little bubble, surrounded by yes-men and sycophants, that you've forgotten how to treat people with basic human decency. You think because you have a platform, you can say whatever you want without consequences." The studio audience was completely silent now, sensing they were witnessing something that would be talked about for years to come. Camera operators instinctively adjusted their angles, knowing they were capturing television history. Kimmel's producers in the control room were frantically debating whether to cut to commercial, but the train wreck was too compelling to stop. "Consequences?" Kimmel laughed again, but there was a brittle edge to it now. "What are you going to do, Johnny? Sue me like you sued everyone else? How did that work out for you? You lost your biggest movie franchise, you lost your reputation, and you're sitting here acting like you're the victim. It's honestly pathetic." That final word hung in the air like a lit fuse, and everyone in the studio could sense they had reached a point of no return. Depp's famous restraint was crumbling, and Kimmel seemed determined to push him over the edge, regardless of the consequences. The next few moments would determine whether this confrontation would explode into something neither man could control. Depp slowly rose from his chair, his movement deliberate and controlled, but his eyes blazing with an intensity that made the entire studio hold its breath. "Pathetic," he repeated, his voice deadly quiet. "You want to know what's pathetic, Jimmy? What's pathetic is a man who builds his career on tearing down others, who invites guests onto his show just to humiliate them for entertainment." Kimmel remained seated, but his cocky demeanor was beginning to crack as he realized he might have pushed too far. "Sit down, Johnny. You're making a scene." "I'm making a scene?" Depp's laugh was sharp and bitter. "You drag me onto your show, under false pretenses, ambush me with tabloid gossip, call me pathetic on national television, and I'm making a scene. The only scene here is the one you've orchestrated for your own sick amusement." The host's face was flushing now, his famous smirk faltering as he felt control of the situation slipping away. "Look, if you can't handle a tough interview—" "Tough interview?" Depp cut him off, his voice rising for the first time. "This isn't an interview, Jimmy. This is a hit job, You invited me here to promote a film, and instead you've turned it into your personal vendetta against someone who's already been through hell. You're like a vulture feeding on roadkill. The studio audience was completely transfixed. Phones, discreetly emerging to capture what was clearly becoming a career-defining moment for both men. Security personnel had moved closer to the stage, sensing the volatile nature of the situation, but unsure whether to intervene. Kimmel finally stood, his height advantage making him feel he could regain control. You know what? You're right. This is my show, and I'll ask whatever questions I want. If you don't like it, there's the door. But don't come in here acting like you're some innocent victim when everyone knows exactly what kind of man you are. What kind of man I am? Depp stepped closer, and the cameras caught the dangerous glint in his eyes. I'm the kind of man who's spent 30 years entertaining people, bringing joy to children around the world, supporting causes I believe in. You're the kind of man who gets his kicks from publicly humiliating guests who trust you enough to sit in that chair. Trust? Kimmel scoffed, but his voice had a slight tremor now. You lost the right to talk about trust when you lost every court case, when Disney fired you, when your own friends testified against you. Youre has been desperately trying to claw back relevance. The words hit their mark, and Depp's carefully maintained composure finally shattered. Has been? His voice boomed across the studio. I've forgotten more about entertaining people than you'll ever know. You're nothing but a cheap shock jock hiding behind a desk, too cowardly to face the consequences of your own cruelty. Kimmel's face was now bright red, his own anger finally matching Depp's. Consequences? The only consequences here are the ones you brought on yourself through your own actions. Don't blame me because your life fell apart. My life fell apart? Depp's voice was now filled with righteous fury. Let me tell you what falls apart, Jimmy. Careers built on exploitation fall apart. Reputations built on cruelty fall apart. And right now, on live television, you're showing everyone exactly who you really are underneath that fake smile. Though tension in the studio was so thick, it was almost suffocating. Every person in the audience could sense they were witnessing something unprecedented, a moment where the carefully constructed facade of late-night television was being stripped away, to reveal something raw and ugly. Neither man seemed able to back down now, their pride and anger driving them toward a collision that would have lasting consequences for both their careers. You know what the real tragedy is here, Jimmy? Depp's voice had taken on a cold, calculated tone that was somehow more menacing than his earlier outbursts. You had a platform that could have been used for good, to lift people up, to create something meaningful. Instead, you chose to become a parasite, feeding off other people's pain for cheap laughs and ratings. Kimmel's hands were visibly shaking. Now, whether from rage or fear, it was impossible to tell. Don't you dare lecture me about my show. You're a washed-up actor who can't get work because nobody wants to be associated with your toxic brand. At least I still have a career. A career? Depp laughed, but it was a sound devoid of any humor. Is that what you call this? Ambushing guests? Spreading lies? Destroying people for entertainment? If that's success, then I'm proud to be considered a failure by your standards. The host's famous composure was completely gone now, replaced by something ugly and desperate. You want to talk about destroying people? You destroyed your own life, your own career, your own marriage. Don't blame the messenger because the message is ugly. The messenger? Depp stepped even closer, close enough that security began moving toward the stage. You're not a messenger, Jimmy. You're an executioner. You bring people here to die publicly while you profit from their humiliation. And the sickest part is, you enjoy it. Kimmel's voice cracked as he shouted back, I enjoy giving people what they want to see. Real talk, real questions, not some sanitized promotional garbage. If you can't handle reality, maybe you should have stayed in your fantasy pirate world. The mention of Pirates of the Caribbean struck a particularly painful nerve, given Depp's very public firing from the franchise. His face darkened, and for a moment it looked like he might actually lunge at the host. That fantasy world brought joy to millions of children. What has your reality ever done except spread misery and cynicism? It's called journalism, Kimmel screamed, his voice echoing through the stunned studio. It's called holding people accountable, something Hollywood has forgotten how to do. Journalism? Depp's voice dripped with contempt. Real journalists fact-check their stories. Real journalists treat their subjects with basic human dignity. You're not a journalist, Jimmy. You're a tabloid hack with a television show. The audience was completely silent now, many looking uncomfortable at witnessing such raw animosity between two public figures. Some were recording on their phones, knowing they were capturing what would become one of the most infamous moments in late-night television history. Kimmel's face was now bright red, veins visible on his forehead as his anger reached a boiling point. You know what? You're right about one thing. I am enjoying this. I'm enjoying watching you squirm. Watching you realize that your charm and your movie star smile can't protect you from the truth anymore. The truth? Depp's voice was now dangerously quiet again. The truth is that you're a bully who's gotten away with it for so long that you think it's normal. The truth is that you've created a toxic environment where cruelty passes for comedy. The truth is that your audience deserves better than this garbage you're serving them. Security was now clearly visible at the edges of the stage, and producers in the control room were frantically trying to decide whether to cut the feed. But the confrontation had taken on a life of its own, both men seemingly unable to stop themselves from saying things that would haunt them for years to come. Better? Kimmel snarled. My audience loves this show because I give them honesty instead of Hollywood fairy tales. Unlike some people, I don't hide behind characters and costumes and pretend to be something I'm not. The personal nature of that attack pushed Depp past his final breaking point. His hands clenched into fists, and his voice became a low growl that carried across the silent studio. You want to see who I really am without the characters and costumes? Keep pushing, Jimmy. Keep pushing and find out. For a moment, the studio existed in a bubble of absolute silence, as if the entire world was holding its breath. Then Kimmel made his fatal mistake. With that trademark smirk returning to his face, he leaned back in his chair with false bravado and delivered the words that would end his career. What are you going to do? Hit me. Go ahead, Johnny. Show everyone what kind of man you really are. Give me the ratings gold. Depp stood perfectly still for 3 heartbeats, his eyes locked on Kimmel's face. Then, without warning, he began to laugh. Not the bitter laugh from earlier, but something genuine and almost relieved. You really don't get it, do you, Jimmy? He said, his voice suddenly calm. This isn't about me proving anything to you or your audience. This is about you showing everyone exactly who you are. He turned away from the stunned host and addressed the cameras directly, his famous charisma returning in full force. Ladies and gentlemen, you've just witnessed something extraordinary. Not me losing my temper, but a talk show host so desperate for ratings that he invited a guest onto his show specifically to humiliate and attack them on national television. Kimmel scrambled to regain control, but his voice came out as a desperate squeak. Johnny, come on, sit back down. Let's finish the interview like professionals. Professionals? Depp turned back to face him, and his smile was devastating. Jimmy, there's nothing professional about what you've done here tonight. You've shown your audience, your network, and the entire entertainment industry that you're willing to destroy basic human decency for a few viral moments. The actor began walking toward the exit, but he wasn't fleeing in anger. Instead, he moved with the dignity of someone who had just won a battle he never wanted to fight. You know what the beautiful irony is in all this, Jimmy? You tried to paint me as the villain, but in doing so, you've revealed yourself as the real monster in this room. Kimmel jumped up from his desk, panic evident in his voice. You can't just walk out. We're in the middle of a live show. Depp paused at the edge of the stage, turning one final time to face his tormentor. That's where you're wrong. I can walk out, and I am walking out. Because unlike you, I still have my dignity. Unlike you, I don't need to tear others down to feel important. And unlike you, I know when enough is enough." The audience, which had been silent throughout the confrontation, suddenly erupted in applause. Not the polite, encouraged applause of a typical talk show, but genuine, thunderous approval that seemed to shake the very foundations of the studio. People were standing, cheering, some even calling out support for Depp as he made his exit. Kimmel stood frozen behind his desk, his face cycling through emotions: rage, embarrassment, fear, and finally, the dawning realization of what he had just done to himself. The applause continued as Depp disappeared through the stage exit, leaving the host alone with the wreckage of his own making. The cameras kept rolling as Kimmel struggled to regain composure, but the damage was irreversible. Social media had already exploded with clips of the confrontation, with overwhelming support for Depp and condemnation for Kimmel's behavior. Within hours, the hashtag #RespectJohnnyDepp was trending worldwide, while Kimmel Exposed quickly followed. The incident became a watershed moment in late-night television, sparking industry-wide discussions about the ethics of ambush interviews and the responsibility hosts have to their guests. Kimmel's ratings plummeted in the following weeks as advertisers pulled their support and celebrities began declining invitations to appear on his show. Meanwhile, Depp's graceful handling of the situation rehabilitated his public image more effectively than any legal victory could have. His refusal to resort to violence despite extreme provocation, combined with his articulate dismantling of Kimmel's tactics, reminded the world why he had been beloved for decades. The confrontation ultimately served as a powerful reminder that, in an era of manufactured drama and clickbait culture, genuine dignity and integrity still had the power to triumph over cheap exploitation and cruel sensationalism.